when you think about too, your team culture is also your reputation outside of your team, right? So it's like, how does your team go into the organization and
Mhm.
represent you all as a team, right? So, I think it's important to just observe and say, what does our team look like when we get together? But also, what's our reputation out in the organization? And
Yeah.
what are the behaviors that people are seeing, right? And is that how you want your team represented out
Yeah.
there?
Welcome to the Made Leader Podcast, where exceptional leadership isn't about who you are, but who you choose to become. Join your host, Jen Arnold, for expert interviews, real-world stories, and practical advice that transforms managers into exceptional leaders. If you're a middle manager ready to unlock your potential, this is your podcast. Let's get started.
Julie, welcome back to the Made Leader Podcast. Glad to have you back on.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for having me back.
Always. And for people who have not tuned into the prior 2 episodes that you've been on, do you mind just introducing yourself?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Julie Benter. I'm a leadership coach and consultant based out of Phoenix, Arizona. And I help leaders a lot with transitions between moving from individual contributor to leader, and then leaders who are building up in their career. I also specialize in emotional intelligence. So, all those things that leaders do on a daily basis around people skills, I help them navigate those things and be more effective.
We need a lot of that. We need more of that in our leaders, and we'll probably talk about that on a future episode. But today, one of the things that has been coming up that I've seen frequently is leaders of leaders, getting really frustrated with their teams because they're
Mhm.
not showing up in the way that the leader wants them to. So some sessions are spent venting and complaining about how everyone's doing things in a way that maybe they're not so happy with. And curious if you have seen that as well.
Yes, I actually hear that a lot from leaders that people maybe aren't doing something in the way they're supposed to, or acting the way they'd like to see them act within the team, or responding maybe quickly or appropriately. Lots of different, I would say there's lots of different things wrapped up in that for each leader. But the first thing that comes to mind is this idea of that dreaded word of expectations. That question of what are they? So, as a leader, do you know what your expectations are, and are you able to clearly define them? But then also, have you clearly communicated the expectations to your team members, and both individually and as a team? And then what process do you have in place to provide feedback, whether it's, hey, thank you, I recognize that you are doing it, keep doing more, or hey, I noticed you did this and this is what I want to see instead. So people really understand what it looks like in real life, because it's easy to say this is what I want, but then to be able to help somebody operationalize it, if you will, in the everyday interactions, I think is that next step.
Yeah, I like that you talk about expectations because so many times leaders don't make the is it implicit, explicit, right? They just say like they should know how to show up. They should know this. They should know that. So I love that to say, what do you expect out of your team? When I think of, I'm curious of how you feel about behaviors because I look at it. I don't know if these are two separate things, right? So I think they're intertwined. But I was working with a team that said, what behaviors do you want to see? How do you want to see people show up? What are the behaviors or actions that you need your team to exhibit to get your goals met? And that was an interesting conversation to say, okay, I need them to be, I'm making this up, adaptable, right? There's so much change on right now. I need them to be adaptable, or I need them to be creative or innovative to reach our goals this year. So that came to a really good discussion among the different leaders to say, oh, okay, well, what does that mean? And we got into the nitty gritty of it. And it was super helpful just to say, okay, this is how you want people to show up, just to establish it. So
Mhm.
how do you, I guess, differentiate between expectations and behaviors?
I think behaviors are definitely a part of expectations. And the way that you were just describing it makes me think about getting clarity and getting specific. Most of the time, leaders will say, I'm not seeing what I want to see. And that clarity around what is it specifically, like you described. So, what is the behavior? So, for me, expectation is like, I want them to be more innovative, I want them to be more collaborative. Okay. So, what are the behaviors that you need and want to see that's going to tell you that they're being those things?
Mm.
Because each one of us has different definitions of what that might look like in your particular environment. And I think it's so important for leaders to meet people where they are and help them develop from where they are. But at the same time, it's important for leaders to say, hey, on my team, this is kind of the, I don't know, standard, status quo, foundation or expectation that I have that I want everybody to meet or get to or develop into. Does that help
Yeah,
a little bit?
super helpful. Yeah, I've got a
Okay.
couple thoughts. One is that let's just say that you want your team to be innovative. There may be people on your team that don't roll in that kind of that space, right? They don't feel innovative. They don't, I think that word just puts a lot of expectations on people. And let's just say that they're more of a linear thinker, right? So
Hmm.
how can you think about innovation to meet them where they're at, what you just said? And I also find that some leaders are very reluctant to say, here are my expectations. And I think they
Hmm.
need to. Just what you said, certain standard of work. I was talking to a leader and they seemed very hesitant to say, here's what I expect. I expect a certain standard of work. And I feel like it is such a hard space for leaders to be in because they're trying to be listening to the employees and this and that. But then they also need to say, no, there is a certain standard on the team. And I feel like some leaders are very hesitant to say that. And I think they need to do it more.
Yeah. And I do wonder if maybe it's because they didn't ever work for a leader who was clear and didn't specify, or maybe they worked for a leader who was so incredibly clear and almost not
Directive.
disciplinarian, but domineering
Mhm.
that it almost became more of my way or the highway. And I think a lot of leaders today, because they know they have to adapt or need to adapt to each individual person, they potentially are reflecting about past experiences that they've had. And I've heard that come out of many leaders' mouths that I've coached. I don't want to be that way. They have a vision or they have an image of a leader in their mind that they don't want to be like. So they almost go to the other side and do the exact opposite that isn't necessarily going to be helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. They haven't seen that vision or they haven't seen that leadership style be successful, right, in the
Mhm.
past. And
Mhm.
it's hard to do. You have to get a feeling of it. But, as we've said probably many times is, we hear clear is kind. So the more clarity you
Mhm.
can bring to it. But who wouldn't? I don't know. I'm just thinking I like to know where I stand on things. Like,
Yeah.
if someone just says, "Hey, here's what the standards are on the team. Here's how we want each other to show up with each other." Like, I find it super helpful. And then let's just say you don't like that approach. At least you know the approach. You can choose. Not everyone has a choice, but you can choose, hey, maybe this team isn't for me in the long term, in the long run, right? That I can do it for now, but maybe I need to look elsewhere if that's not the behaviors that you want to show up with, right?
Yeah. Or you can negotiate the different you can negotiate the meaning of what those expectations or what that vision is for the leader. Because I've definitely been on teams in the past where the leader says, "This is what I want." And I don't know if you want to call it managing up or just getting clarification, but as a member of that team, I really want to know more about what that means. And sometimes, and hopefully, a leader is going to be open to hearing, well, this is the way that I define it, or this is the way that I think I show up in that way. it could potentially open up the leader's mind about, oh, maybe there's another definition. Maybe there's another behavior that I can bring into the mix because of this person's style. 'Cause you
Mhm.
don't want your team to become automatons. You don't want them to just stand in file, right? And just be a widget. But at the same time, I think there's a place for flexibility around
Mhm.
the expectations, but I feel like it definitely needs to be a discussion versus a mandate. And maybe that's where you were talking earlier about leaders kind of struggle with it, is they feel like it's some sort of decree or mandate. And it's I think of it like a starting point, like, hey, this is what I want to see. How can we get here? What do
Mhm.
we need to do differently? What do we need to do better? Um, what can we help each other with so that we can get here?
Yeah, or even bringing
Mm.
them into those conversations that, "Hey, we're trying to reach these goals this year. What behaviors do we all need to show up with each other to do?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Um, because then they're saying, "Alright, so if we're trying to get here, then we need to pivot when needed." I don't know, again, making it up. But you know, I think it is helpful to say, "Here's what as a leadership team, here's what we need to do to be successful. Here's the behaviors that we need to role model
Mhm.
first."
Yes.
Um, and
Always.
then right? And then help the team work with the team maybe to define it, right? So, we need to be innovative. Alright, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
Right? We need to be creative. So some of these words can be vague, so I think as you said earlier, how can you define it very
Yeah.
specifically? So
And
they
maybe it's per project, maybe it's per initiative, maybe it is more generic or general overarching all the time. But I think at the end of the day, you know, leaders have so much on their plate and they have so many things going on and they have so many moving parts. And I'm very familiar with in my own experience and see this in a lot of leaders that I talk with is if you don't address it, it's gonna fester. And so
Mhm. Mhm.
if you even if okay, so say you haven't even said these are the expectations, we know that we start talking with ourselves and we say, I'm not seeing it. That's so frustrating. We have this kind of dialogue with ourselves. And that puts us in a place to have a certain perspective about individuals on the team.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the leader who doesn't clarify and communicate. So then we have the leader that does clarify and communicate, but isn't able and willing to continue to talk about it. And I think this is something I've heard throughout my career is, well, I told them once. Because one of my questions I always ask is, well, how many times have you had that conversation?
Mhm.
And from the perspective of expectations, especially when it comes to clarifying, communicating, reinforcing, redirecting, that conversation should be going on all the time, not just a
Absolutely.
one and done. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so it's stating, "Here's what I really want to see from this team. These are the behaviors because that's what's gonna get us to the goal." Have a discussion, and then it is always weaving that in, right? So, rewarding people, even if it's just, "Hey, I really loved how you collaborated on that project," but
Yeah.
recognize people because sometimes when I help them unpack that frustration, there are people doing great stuff. But they get
Exactly.
so lost in the frustration with it's usually 2 to 3 people. That's it. And
Yep.
then you're going, "What's so and so doing over here?" "Oh, yeah, she's great. She's doing all the things." Have you told her that? "No,
Exactly.
no."
Yeah.
And it's like, how can you recognize and reward in the whatever way you have access to? That's another conversation. But just giving them an email, "Thank you for doing that." And then also thinking of the systems, right? Because when we talk about we want everyone to collaborate, well, think about how many systems are set up in organizations to reward individual performance,
Oh gosh, absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
thinking about what is the current reward system for the people to do the behaviors, because sometimes we're working against ourselves, right? The
Yeah.
system is working against us in these behaviors that we're establishing or trying to establish.
Yeah. I can't remember if I said this on one of our past conversations or not, but early in my career, I had this leader who said, I'm going to keep saying the same thing until you're saying it. And then that's when I know I've been successful because we kept, saying, "Oh my gosh, stop saying that." He said, "But you haven't implemented it or you haven't integrated it into your words. You haven't started operating from that place. And until you do, I know I'm going to have to keep talking about it because I need it to eventually come out of you and from you and in you." And I thought that was such an interesting, and if you use that model, what should happen is, and eventually what did happen on this team is that he would start to say it and we would finish his sentence. Right. And then that went into meetings and times and conversations when he wasn't there. And then that's what helped solidify the environment, the expectations, the culture of the team. But he did not stop saying it, even though he probably was bored of saying it too.
Well,
But
that's just
he
it.
wanted to make sure we got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we think that we tell them, like I always come back to my children in these conversations. I really need to stop,
Exactly.
but, like, I tell my son every Wednesday night, "You gotta take the trash out. It's trash day tomorrow," and he acts like it's a surprise each time. I'm very sick of saying it, but I know there's my time. I gotta tell him it's time to take the trash cans out. Like, until that behavior starts happening, or I love that your leader said, "Until you start saying it, we're gonna keep doing it, right? I'm gonna keep saying
Exactly.
it." It's really consistent leader.
Well, and it made us laugh and it kept the
Yeah.
humor, it kept it light as well.
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes what can happen as well, if a leader's going to keep repeating it, it's very easy to see if they're frustrated. And he always would come at it from a place of lightness and say,
Mhm.
"You know what I need. You know what we want. I'm not seeing it." And it would be like, "Yeah, you're right." Like it, but
Yeah.
it's because he was communicating it on a regular basis when he did bring it up or when we did get called out, if you will. But it made it funny versus if a leader approaches it in a different way that isn't from such a positive place, then it can become, "Oh no, here we go again." And then that creates those other feelings and those frustrating, potential frustration and annoyance that aren't going to be productive.
Yeah, I mean, you can make any of that fun. Sounds like you've had some good leaders in your day.
I've been very lucky. I've had some great leaders.
Well, just thinking about, even just the standards of when do we start meetings? Are we starting meetings right on time? Are we starting them late? Is it acceptable to walk in 15 minutes late to a meeting, which I've seen, and not address it like it's no big deal? And maybe that's a me thing, right? Like, I find it really, bothersome for someone to come in that late to a meeting and there's no problem, right? Of course, there's
Yeah.
but what if that's okay on your team, that's okay on your team. If it's not okay on your team, how can you make it fun or funny that, "Hey, the last person show up to the meeting, they have to buy breakfast," or something, right? They have to
Exactly.
I had a trainer once, we did a training, and he said, "If you're not back, at like, on break time, you have to sing in front of the whole group." Nobody was back late.
Nobody was ever break
"Oh, no,
late. Yeah,
yeah. So
exactly.
you can make all of that stuff funny, but it's like,
Mhm.
what is it? State it. How can you get people to on board in a fun way to get them to, adopt those behaviors? Um,
Yeah.
you know, Unfortunately, I think there's also this piece of keeping people accountable when they're not following the
Mhm.
behaviors
Of course.
and not and this is an area I see that it's really hard to do and keeping people accountable and not in front of the group, like you said, like not you're not embarrassing, shaming
Yeah.
anyone, but reinforcing it. So it's like it's rewarding for the people who are doing it and then it's having those conversations with the people that can't seem to really get on board with
Yeah.
the behaviors or the expectations or the guidelines that you've set.
Yeah. And to that, what comes up for me is to be able to check my assumptions as a leader, because most of the time, if I've said this and they're doing it anyway,
Mhm.
our first response is they're doing it on purpose. They're doing it because they don't care. They're doing it because of all these reasons. To that, I say, withhold judgment, withhold assumption, and ask the question. We've had
Mhm.
conversations about this. I'm not seeing you do it. help me understand what's going on. What's getting in the way?
Yeah.
Do you need to be more clear about it? Do you need ideas on what it looks like? Is there something that is I'm doing that's preventing you from doing it? Because this needs to start happening. But again, it's a conversation versus an accusation or an assumption. Because again, if we're operating with those assumptions on the back of our minds, we're going to start treating those people differently, and they'll be able to feel it.
I
And
lo I
no.
love that you said is getting curious, right? So it's not being
Mhm.
accusatory. Um, it is getting very curious because you don't know what's in the way. You don't know if you've really said it as much as you've said it. You don't know if they have no idea what you're talking about or you're
Yeah.
saying they're not being innovative enough. Well, yeah, they were sitting there going, I have no idea. I've seen it with a team to where, you know, leadership gets frustrated because they feel like everyone's always pushing back on their, I don't, if their team pushes back or questions or doesn't really understand, they see it as they're just not team players,
Mhm.
et cetera, to where it's like, no, they just really need to see the why. They need to understand. They need more transparency around the decision making. Um, so they're not really being resistant. They just need to understand why we're going in this direction, which can sometimes feel to a leader like they're just not kind of going along with it, right?
Yeah. And if it hasn't been explicitly communicated, at the end of the day, I always say to leaders, that's on you. I- You cannot assume that everyone knows what's going on in your brain
Mhm.
because they don't. And I can't remember again. It's like if I'm hopefully not repeating myself, but this concept of like, what are your non negotiables or what are those things as a leader that, and I would say this either what are your pet peeves or what are your like, oh my gosh, perfect world, right? And I always encourage leaders to identify those regardless of how long they've been the leader. Like, it's great when you first come in to be able to say, here's some things to know about me. Your point about being late. Every team I've ever led, one of the first things I communicate when I am become the leader is saying, one thing to know about me, I hate it when people show up late to meetings. So in the event that you need to be late,
Mhm.
I want you to let me know ahead of time if at all possible, or I'd like you to have a really great reason why you were late and be able to share that with me because
Right.
that's going to help me know that you're still being respectful of that expectation, but that you're holding yourself accountable. You're taking ownership of your role. And early in my career as a leader, as I was learning the way, I would unfortunately go down into the dark side and, "Oh, they're late because and again, had to stop myself eventually and say, "Hey, what held you up? What prevented you from getting here on time?"
Mhm.
And in that question, you're basically communicating. The expectation is that if you're late, you have a reason and that
Yeah.
you communicate it. So I think that's another layer to this that is important is even in how you respond to somebody not doing what you're expecting or what you've shared that is important to you is to then ask a follow-up question and really dig into the understanding behind the why they're not
Mhm.
doing it. Yeah, out of all
Yeah.
fairness.
Yeah. So you got me thinking. So
Yeah,
non-negotiables as a leader. So one of yours is being on time to meetings. Was that a legit example? That was real?
that was real. Yeah,
Okay. What else do
yeah.
you have? Give me another one because you got me thinking about mine.
Yeah, let's see. I think the one of the biggest ones, because this is obviously has a huge impact on us as leaders, is when somebody's working on something and something happens that's pretty important, but they're worried about sharing that it's happened or that it's going to cause a conflict. Like, I would rather know. I At the end of the day, I don't really care why. Like, if it was a mistake, it was a mistake. If it was an error, it's an error. But I'm always wondering about what could we do better next time so it doesn't happen again. But if you keep it a secret, we can't do anything about it.
Mhm.
So I would say that don't hide. And with a new team, it takes a while to help
Yeah.
people get to that place because you have no idea who they reported to before and what sharing a mistake looked like.
Mhm.
But that element of let's be open about how we're working and what we're working on. So in the event that some snag comes up, we're going to share that with each other and we're going to help us work through it. So it doesn't become a bigger issue or it doesn't become a crisis. Like, because the longer you keep something to your chest or inside, potentially the bigger it can get. And then maybe I'm going to hear about it from my leader versus directly from the person. And then
Yeah.
that's going to cause my frustration. Like, why didn't you tell me? And
Right.
then I'll
Right.
think, oh my gosh, like what's missing in our relationship that you don't feel safe letting me know? It may not have anything to do with me. Maybe it's, again, their past experience. So that would be probably my second one. And now I'm trying to think of my third. But what are yours that are coming up for
We're
you?
gonna have the whole list. You can go into a new too. Here is my manual on all the stuff that I don't like.
Exactly. They don't have more than 3 to 5 max because that's too
No.
many to remember. Then people will be tiptoeing around all day.
Right? Like, "Oh, I don't know what to do."
Exactly.
My 2 are like, don't come to me with a problem. Like, come with some solutions or some
Mm.
thought into it. And even if you're going like, "I've worked through this and I really am at a loss." Cool. At least you've worked through it, but don't throw a problem in my lap without doing a little bit of critical thinking. Drives me insane. The other thing is no triangulation, no drama. You have a problem with someone, you go to you have a problem with me, you come to me, fine. But the petty drama, the high school stuff that always it happens on any team. I don't care the age of the team. I don't care the
I
tenure
know.
of the team. I don't care the seniority of the team. Sometimes teams are like high school, and I have no tolerance for it. So I'm getting worked up right now.
Yeah, I can
It's
see
just
that.
it's just
Oh,
ridiculous. It's like I'm always for saying the things that need to be said
yeah,
and getting it out. But those are the 2 things I'd say were non-negotiables for me as a leader. I don't think I was very explicit with it. I remember having some problems on my team where I was like, "Oh, so and so said this," and I remember having to deal with it. And yeah, so I'd say those are my 2. But I think if leaders can come out to say, "Here are my 2 non-negotiables. Here are my 2 pet peeves," if you will. Like, I don't wanna have
yeah.
this happen. Like you said, not a whole laundry list, but maybe, like, 3 max.
Couple. And really be honest with yourself. Like, this is an exploratory exercise anybody can
Yeah.
do as a leader or as a team member too. Like, at the end of the day, what would just really tick me off?
Mhm.
It This is that idea of that talking about the water that we're swimming in. Again, like, we don't typically talk about what we
Mhm.
need and want from each other. We just, unfortunately, maybe wait until it becomes a conflict or an issue, and then we learn, "Oh, I didn't know that you didn't like that," or,
Right.
"I didn't know that was so important," because probably it wasn't that important to me, or maybe that wasn't my identical pet peeve.
Yeah.
Or and I will
Right.
say, for those of you who might be listening that feel uncomfortable with focusing on the negative, I like to also offer the opportunity to say, "In the perfect world." So my perfect world as a leader is this. These things are happening. So you can reframe that everyone shows up on time, and if they can't, there's a reason. Or when a problem arises, that you communicate there's an issue, right? So you can communicate it in either way, but I
Yeah.
think it's really depends on the leader and how they show up and what frame of what their perspective is like and what they sound like. So it sounds authentic. Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed a leader, Lexi B. It's a podcast. I can link it up in the show notes. But she talked about how her non-negotiables are respect everyone. Like she called it home training. Like you like do not go out and embarrass me, right? In there, you
Oh,
respect everyone. And
I
then
love
secondly,
it.
was the same thing you said is tell me if there's a problem. I
Yeah.
don't need to hear it from anyone else but you, right? So I think being that clear with it is really helpful so people know what to expect.
Yeah.
But, we've talked about let me summarize what we talked about, and then we can just say if there's
Yeah.
anything that we're missing. One was defining behaviors and with expectations and standards, being as
Mhm.
clear as possible there, rewarding and recognizing those behaviors that you are seeing, kind of peel back the onion a bit, get past the frustrations
Yep.
and look at your team members who are doing good work. Addressing the other behaviors that you're not so fond of in a way that is curious,
Yes.
right? You're just
Yes.
it's not judgmental, you're just going, "Hey, what's going on?" And then we just talked about naming your non-negotiables, naming your in an ideal world statements. But what else? What else can help leaders get a handle on the culture of their team? And that's what we're talking about is team culture here.
Yeah. I think all the things we've talked about so far are very much leader driven. And maybe then the second layer or the flip side of this then is how do you bring your team into the conversation? How do you identify and recognize what kind of styles you have on the team? Think about your needs and expectations as a leader, and then together, what is possible or what is realistic, right? Because
Mhm, mhm.
I might want to have, you know, I might want to have all of me's on my team and have everyone operating and existing in just the way I would. But I know in reality, that's actually not really in any way, shape, or form a benefit. It's actually a curse. And the more diverse my team is in terms of anything,
Yeah.
whether it be styles, perspectives, life experience, age, gender, whatever it is, it's so important to have lots of different minds coming to the table. And so then as a leader, how do I bring those into the mix so that everyone feels like they can be part of our team together? Like they
Mm.
feel like they can be themselves, but that they can also meet the expectations.
But it's so comfortable and familiar to have people just like us on our team. I am
And that's when you
definitely
start to get infighting, right?
yeah, yeah, right. God, what an idiot. Oh.
Exactly. Why is he doing what I want?
But yes, I've definitely
Oh,
fallen into that trap as a leader, getting the people that are just like me, until I
yeah.
realized it. A lot of it's in retrospect, not during it. Um, when you're bringing up the team, I think, I've mentioned this before, but just want to put a fine point on it is to bring the team into what behaviors, what expectations, and I'm kind of going back to the behaviors, are going to help us reach our goals. If you have team goals and everyone's, stacked hands on these are our goals, this is what we're trying to achieve for the organization, how are we gonna get there? And part
Mhm.
of that is the culture we work in, the water we swim in, and the behaviors and how we show up with each other. So I think inviting I love that you brought up the team piece is like inviting the team in and saying, how are we gonna get there? And then they can see it for themselves, they gotta work through it themselves as well.
Yeah. I think a lot about when, and I don't know if this has been your experience as well. So when I do a training or I facilitate an engagement or a meeting or have a group of people together, I always like to ask at the beginning, what will make this worth your while? What
Mhm.
things do you need to have happen, or what conditions do you need to have in place for you to feel like it was worth it, that you can participate, that you're here with us? And I kind of see that model. You could use that same model as a leader, right?
Mhm.
We're a team. And you can do this every single time a new person comes in if you want, because you're adding a new
Mhm.
style or preference or mindset to your team. But it's just saying, hey, we're a team. What do you need to have in place in this team to make it feel that it's working? At the end of the day, when you look back on this team, what do you want to have happening in this team that you say, wow, that was a great team, right? What are the conditions? What are the behaviors? What are the elements of our team that we really want to have to make this a great team in the way that we see the world?
Yeah,
'Cause
I
it's
like
not a
that.
one size fits all.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful question, a couple questions you can ask the team, and I think it's important as new people come on because that changes your dynamics, that changes your culture, um, and you want it to, right? Like, you want well, not always. I just
Yeah.
talked myself out of that
Sometimes.
one, but it inadvertently, new person brings new dynamics, and you
Oh,
need to
yeah.
at least pay attention to
Absolutely.
them shifting, right? And what's
Yeah.
good to shift? What can that person bring to enhance the culture, right?
Yeah. And if you have some, if you kind of going back to what you said of the teams you've had where there might have been some conflict or some, you know, messes in between people, I think what it does is by having that new person come in and then re-having or having the conversation again about who do we want to be as a team, kind of refreshes.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe if we haven't talked about it for a while, it gives people a chance to go, oh, yeah, okay. And then as a leader, maybe then that's that time to revisit, like, hey, I'm still noticing that you have a conflict, um, that there's a conflict going on here. Like, what can we do? So it's,
Mhm.
finding ways to weave in the conversation about expectations and behaviors and culture in lots of different ways so that when it's coming up again, maybe it's coming up in a more organic way, and then you can still revisit it if you still see that there's some challenges and it's not just you always harping on the person.
Mhm.
Hey, you're not doing it, you're not doing it, you're not doing it, versus,
Yeah.
hey, we've got a new person on our team now, and we really want to make sure that we can move forward. So what can we
Mhm.
do to resolve this? It doesn't
Yeah.
continue to be a problem. Yeah.
And that person doesn't wanna run away going, "What kind of team is this?"
Exactly, exactly. Because we all get that spidey sense, right? You can tell when you're in a meeting, in a room, either online or in person, you can tell who gets along and who doesn't. People think that they hide it really well, but, you know, we just like, there's so many things that we give off in our vibes and our mannerisms and our eyes and our voice, just so many things that tell us how people really feel about each other.
Which is so interesting. That's why I love being an outside observer because I have had people say, "Oh, I noticed that you look like you were not to me, but to another team member, you're getting defensive." I was like, "I didn't read that at all." Right? So it's like there's like this emotionally loaded. I was like, I
Hmm.
spoke up. I was like, I'm not emotionally involved. I didn't see that. Of course, speak up if you are, but like, don't. So yes, people read
Yeah.
into it. There's just so many emotions and experiences involved in a team. Um, so being an observer, it's fun. It's a fun place to be.
It is. It really is. And it's nice not to have it be in you so that you can see it, because I think what that then helps you do later, if you are in a situation, you've observed the situation and you can kind of say, huh, I wonder if there might be something else going on here, just like in that situation I
Yeah.
observed.
Right, right. This is making me think. I keep thinking I'm gonna end this, and then I think of something else. But then when you think about too, your team culture is also your reputation outside of your team, right? So it's like, how does your team go into the organization and
Mhm.
represent you all as a team, right? So, um, I think it's important to just observe and say, what does our team look like when we get together? But also, what's our reputation out in the organization? And
Yeah.
what are the behaviors that people are seeing, right? And is that how you want your team represented out
Yeah.
there? So,
And if it's not, what do we want them to see and how can we get there? I think, again, creating that together is so important. It's not just the directive from the leader.
no,
Mm.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, because hopefully as a team, you don't want to be seen in a negative light in the organization. I mean, that won't get you anywhere. It's not helpful.
Probably won't be as productive. Nobody wants to work with you. They see you coming and they're like, oh no.
Right.
Versus you want to be that team where people go, I love working with that team. I can't wait to have to work with that team, right?
Right. And I think that can be
Yeah.
missed when we're talking about this, just as you meet as a team or you're working together as a team. It's like your team's working with other people. So just keeping that in mind, asking around, right? You can usually people
Yeah.
will come to you if you have a good peer relationship, right? People will
Yes.
come to be like, hey, this happened, right?
Yeah.
Um, all right, I'm going down a rabbit hole. So I'm gonna pull myself back in.
All right. But that's a great call out. I think that's, again, if your team is maybe struggling with that internal dynamic, maybe that's a potential avenue to try as a leader, is to say, well, let's talk about what our team looks like to everybody else. How do we show up? How do they see us? Maybe ask some peers, right?
Mhm,
What does it seem like our team is giving off? I love that idea because it's another angle, and it's a little bit more, maybe there's a little bit more stake in the game, because
mhm.
if you do want to get things accomplished in the organization, you do need people to see you in a good light.
Well, yeah, that was really important when I worked in, an insurance company because I worked in different areas while I was there in my 8 years, but one, I was in, healthcare, and we worked very hand in hand with sales, right? So it was very important to my boss that sales was like, "Yes, bring them out in front of clients," not like, "No, no, we're good." right?
Yeah,
But that
exactly.
that was really important to her. So depending on what role you play, you're probably not going to be sitting there by yourself, not talking to anyone. So,
Right.
whether it's client facing or just internal facing your internal stakeholders, it makes a
Yeah,
difference. So pay
absolutely.
attention. All
Yeah.
right, Julie, did we miss
Um,
anything? Do we need to land the
I think
plane?
so. But I mean, hopefully people have a chance to pose additional questions after they've watched it and let us know if there's anything else that they have done or they have used or they have questions about. Always interested to learn more and hear from folk.
Yes. So if there are any questions, this is going to be on YouTube. Put it down there. Or if you have tips, because I think we can learn so much from other leaders and what they're doing and some practices that have worked with them for them. So, Julie, thanks so much for your time.
You bet.
Appreciate
It's so great to be here again. It's always good to chat with you.
it. Until next time.
Okay.